The lake shimmered under the late afternoon sun, and I couldn't help but pause, taking in the crisp air that carried hints of pine and firewood. On the surface, it was everything I had dreamed of, a family retreat that looked like something out of a postcard. My children's laughter echoed across the dock, their voices skipping across the water like pebbles. Ethan walked beside me, his hand loosely holding mine, though I could feel his mind was somewhere else. To anyone looking, we were the perfect family. But I knew better. Something in his eyes gave him away. Later that evening, we sat by the fire pit, the flames painting our faces in shades of orange and gold. The kids roasted marshmallows, sticky fingers and giggles filling the air. I tried to lock the moment in my memory, the warmth of the fire, the sound of the wood crackling like applause for our happiness. Ethan sat close enough to touch, yet his attention kept slipping to his phone. The glow lit up his face as he angled it away, whispering something about work emails. I smiled like it didn't matter, but deep down, a knot tightened in my stomach. The next days unfolded like a string of photographs, walks along the lake, meals by the fire, staged smiles for the camera. I wanted to believe in them, to convince myself this was real. Still, every time Ethan drifted off to the side, thumb dancing across that screen, I felt him pulling further away. And the more I noticed, the harder it became to silence the voice in my head that whispered something was terribly off. On one of our morning walks, the air felt crisp enough to sting my cheeks, and the kids skipped ahead, chasing each other with sticks they pretended were swords. I held my camera high, capturing their joy, but when I turned to share the moment with Ethan, he wasn't there. He lagged behind, head bent, fingers scrolling across his phone. I called his name once, then again, louder. He glanced up with a guilty smile and shoved the phone into his pocket, mumbling something about an urgent client. My heart pinched, but I let it slide. I always let it slide. At dinner, I lit candles even though we were miles away from any luxury. The soft glow made everything feel warmer, safer, almost intimate. The kids laughed at silly stories, their voices colliding with the gentle crackle of the fireplace. Ethan sat across from me, pushing food around his plate. His phone buzzed again, and though he tried to ignore it, I saw the way his eyes darted toward it, hungry, restless. I sipped my wine and tried to swallow down the bitter thought that maybe his heart was somewhere else entirely. That night, after the kids had drifted to sleep, I sat outside on the porch. The lake reflected the moon like a giant mirror, flawless and still. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me, searching for comfort in the silence. Inside, Ethan's silhouette moved across the cabin, phone in hand, pacing like he was haunted by something I couldn't see. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even boredom. But as I watched him through the glass, I felt the ache of distance more than the cold night air. The kids begged for another photo by the water, so I held up Ethan's phone, snapping the scene as the wind tangled their hair. Their smiles were so pure, so untouched by the tension I carried in my chest. When I handed the phone back to him, he clutched it quickly, almost protectively, as if it held secrets I wasn't meant to see. I laughed it off, pretending not to notice, but deep inside, suspicion began to curl like smoke. Impossible to ignore once I'd caught its scent. That evening, I tried to lose myself in the simplicity of the trip. Cards scattered on the table, the soft thud of logs tossed into the fire, the sound of Ethan's low voice as he read a story to the kids. It looked perfect. It sounded perfect. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being on the outside of something I was supposed to belong to. His phone buzzed again, and when he excused himself, I kept my smile steady for the children, though my chest felt hollow. When he finally returned, he slipped into bed beside me, his breathing steady, his body heavy with sleep. I stared at the ceiling, every creak of the cabin suddenly amplified. My hand brushed against the nightstand where his phone rested, its dark screen daring me to reach for it. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. Still, a part of me whispered that the truth was hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment I'd finally be brave enough to look. The next evening, as the kids raced each other up the cabin stairs, I reached for Ethan's phone, planning to snap a quick picture of him by the lake. He looked handsome in the fading light, the water glowing behind him. But before my finger even touched the screen, a notification slid across the top. 7 words that made my heart stutter. I hope this trip ends soon. I miss your touch. My throat went dry, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I forced my face to stay calm, smiling as if nothing had happened, snapping the picture like that was all I wanted. Ethan didn't even notice. He just took the phone back quickly, slipping it into his pocket like it was a fragile secret. My chest burned, but I said nothing. The kids were still laughing, and I couldn't bring myself to shatter their innocence with a scene. So I swallowed the shock, tucking it deep inside where he couldn't see it. That night, when Ethan finally drifted off to sleep, I lay stiff beside him, staring at the dark outline of his face. His breathing was steady, almost peaceful, while mine felt shallow and jagged. My hand hovered near the nightstand where his phone rested. The glow of the moon made it glint like a forbidden treasure. I hesitated, heart racing, before finally sliding it into my hand. The number from the message stared back at me. With a trembling finger, I pressed call. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, loud enough to drown out the silence of the cabin. My hands shook so badly I had to press the phone tighter just to keep it steady. For a split second, I thought about hanging up, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But curiosity mixed with dread kept me locked in place. Every second stretched, heavy as lead, until finally the line clicked. A woman's voice hadn't spoken yet, but I could hear the soft intake of her breath, as if she was expecting him. I didn't say a word. Instead, I listened, waiting for her to speak first. And when she whispered, "Baby?" with such ease, such intimacy, it felt like a blade pressed against my ribs. My stomach flipped, and I nearly dropped the phone. I stayed silent, frozen between fury and heartbreak. She continued, her tone warm, like honey poured over a wound. "I can't wait until you're back. I've been counting the days." Her words wrapped around me like a vice, confirming the fear I hadn't dared put into words. Beside me, Ethan snored softly, blissfully unaware of the storm raging inches away from him. I turned to look at his sleeping face, illuminated faintly by the moonlight spilling through the window. How could he look so peaceful, while my world tilted on its axis? I pressed the phone harder against my ear, caught between the urge to scream and the strange calm that comes just before something inside you breaks. That calmness carried me to the next word. "Hello." The word slipped from my lips before I even realized it, soft but sharp enough to slice through the quiet. On the other end, there was a pause, a sudden intake of breath. She hadn't expected me. For a moment, the line was heavy with confusion, like both of us were caught in a place we didn't belong. "Who is this?" she finally asked, her voice edged with caution, though still carrying that tenderness I couldn't ignore. My pulse raced, my free hand clutching the sheets as though they could anchor me. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit between us, long enough for her to grow uneasy. "Is Ethan there?" she asked again, this time with more urgency. My stomach clenched hearing his name roll off her tongue so naturally, as if it belonged to her just as much as it belonged to me. I glanced at him lying inches away, his chest rising and falling, completely oblivious. For the first time, I felt like I was sharing him with a stranger, and the realization scorched me from the inside out. "Finally," I whispered back, steady but trembling. "No, it's not who you think." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear her breath falter, hear the way her certainty cracked in real time. And in that fragile gap, I realized this wasn't just about me or him anymore. There was another woman, another life, tangled into his lies. And whether I wanted to or not, I was about to step into a truth that would change everything. There was a beat of silence on the line, and then her voice came back, softer now, almost trembling. "Then, who are you?" she asked. I swallowed hard, tasting bitterness at the back of my throat. "I'm his wife," I said, the words steady though my heart pounded like a war drum. The quiet that followed was louder than any scream. I could almost feel her shock bleeding through the phone, a mirror of my own disbelief just minutes earlier. Her breath hitched, and then she let out a shaky laugh that carried no humor at all. His wife? No. He told me you two were done. He said you were just dragging things out. My chest tightened at the sound of her breaking. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. She had believed in the same man I once trusted with my whole world. He told me he was stuck in a failing marriage, she continued, her voice cracking. He promised he'd leave you soon. I looked at Ethan, sprawled across the bed like a child who hadn't a care in the world, and fury welled up in me so fast it made my skin burn. That failing marriage? I whispered, pressing a hand over my stomach. I'm pregnant, and right now we're on a family trip he said was meant to relieve his work stress. On the other end, I heard her gasp, a sound so raw it felt like we were both crumbling together. In that moment, two strangers became unwilling allies, both betrayed by the same man. She went quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear her trying to piece her world back together on the other end. He told me, she began, her words faint, like she was ashamed of even saying them out loud. He told me we'd start fresh once he was free. He said he loved me. He made me believe I was the only one. My throat tightened at the familiarity of it all. That was the same Ethan I knew, the one who could sell lies with a smile, who could make empty promises sound like gospel. I closed my eyes, the weight of it pressing down on me. You're not the only one, I said softly, almost as if I was trying to soothe her pain while confronting my own. He's been lying to both of us, and while you've been waiting for him to leave, I've been waiting for him to come back to me. The bitterness of those words made my chest ache. On the other end, she exhaled shakily, the sound of someone realizing the floor had just collapsed beneath them. I don't want to fight with you, she whispered, her tone shifting, stripped of pride, stripped of blame. Because clearly, we're both the fools here. For the first time, I let out a breath that wasn't filled with anger. It was something closer to relief. She wasn't my enemy. He was. And in that strange, fragile moment, I realized that instead of being torn apart by his betrayal, we had the power to turn it against him. That seed of an idea began to bloom inside me. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice trembling like she was barely holding herself together. And strangely, I understood her. I had been sitting in that same uncertainty for weeks, pretending not to notice, forcing smiles, convincing myself everything was fine. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to keep playing the fool. Then let's decide together, I told her, my voice firmer now. If he can lie to both of us this easily, maybe it's time we show him we're not as blind as he thinks. She hesitated, then whispered, What are you saying? I looked at Ethan, blissfully asleep, his chest rising and falling like nothing in the world could disturb his peace. The sight of him fueled a calm fury in me. I'm saying we don't give him the chance to explain his way out of this, I replied. We take control. We end it on our own terms, not his. The words surprised even me, but once they were out, I knew they were right. My anger had transformed into something sharper, purpose. On the other end, I heard her inhale, then slowly exhale, as if she was letting the truth settle into her bones. All right, she said, her voice steadier than before. Tell me what you have in mind. In that instant, an unspoken pact was formed between two women who should have been enemies, but instead became allies. The night was still, the cabin silent, yet I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't just about surviving his lies anymore. It was about reclaiming the power he thought he had. A few days later, I suggested to Ethan that we grab coffee, framing it as a quiet moment to talk about our future. He agreed easily, flashing that practiced smile, the same one that had fooled me and her for so long. My heart raced as we walked into the little cafe, its bell chiming above the door, the smell of roasted beans hanging thick in the air. He thought it was just us, but he didn't see her already seated with me, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes sharp but steady. The moment his gaze landed on her, the color drained from his face. He froze mid-step, his confidence evaporating in an instant. For a split second, he opened his mouth like he had something rehearsed to say, but no words came out. His eyes darted between the two of us, searching for an escape that didn't exist. I leaned back in my chair, calm in a way I hadn't expected, watching the man who thought he had all the power suddenly crumble. "Sit," I said, my voice cool, almost casual, though my pulse hammered in my ears. He obeyed, lowering himself into the chair like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The cafe around us hummed with quiet chatter and clinking cups, ordinary life continuing as if this wasn't the moment everything was about to shatter. Across from me, she stayed silent, her presence enough to twist the knife. For the first time, Ethan wasn't leading the conversation. We were. Ethan cleared his throat, fumbling for a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "This isn't what it looks like," he started, his voice cracking under the weight of his own lie. I almost laughed. How many times had he used that line before? I slid his phone across the table, the screen lighting up with the very messages he thought were hidden. "Really?" I asked, my tone sharp but calm. "Because it looks exactly like what it is." His lips parted, but nothing came out. The silence between us said more than his excuses ever could. Beside me, she pulled her own phone from her bag and laid it down next to mine. The screen glowed with screenshots, hotel receipts, proof that painted the same story in painful detail. Ethan's shoulders slumped as his hands curled into fists on the table. For once, there was no performance, no charming defense. He was trapped in the truth. Watching him squirm under the weight of his own deceit filled me with a strange, steady calm. This was no longer my shame to carry. It was his. The clink of ceramic cups nearby punctuated the moment, making the whole scene feel even more surreal. Ordinary people sipping lattes while my marriage unraveled across the table. His eyes darted between us, desperate, as though one of us might still offer him an escape hatch. But there was no escape. For the first time, he was the one cornered, and we were the ones holding the mirror up to his lies. Ethan finally leaned forward, his voice low, almost pleading. "Natasha, you have to understand I never meant to—" I cut him off with a glance, sharp enough to silence him. "Don't," I said, steady and cold. "Don't insult us with another story." His mouth opened and closed like he was drowning on dry land, but I didn't flinch. For years, he had written the script, controlled the narrative. Not anymore. The other woman leaned in then, her tone calm but firm. "You told me you loved me," she said, laying down one last piece of proof between us. "You told me you'd leave her, and yet here you sit, pretending you're the victim." Ethan's face flushed crimson, his composure unraveling thread by thread. He stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come, his eyes wide with the realization that every lie had finally caught up with him. I looked at him one last time, no anger left, only clarity. "You thought you could build 2 lives," I said softly, every word deliberate. "Now you have none." The cafe noise carried on around us, milk steaming, silverware clinking, but in our little corner, time stood still. And then, without another word, I pushed back my chair, feeling the weight lift from my chest as I stood. The air in the cafe felt different the moment I rose to my feet, lighter, freer, as though I had just stepped out of a cage I hadn't realized I was in. Beside me, she stood too, her shoulders squared, her eyes steady. Neither of us said a word to Ethan as we gathered our things. The scrape of our chairs against the floor was louder than any accusation. He sat frozen, his mouth half open, as though if he just found the right line, he could reel us back in. But that moment was gone. I felt his eyes burning into my back as I reached for the door, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of looking over my shoulder. He had spent years pulling strings, weaving lies, making us dance to his tune. And now, in the simplest of acts, walking away, we had cut them all. The bell above the cafe door chimed as we stepped out together, sunlight pouring over us in sharp contrast to the shadow he had kept us in. For the first time in months, maybe years, I inhaled without heaviness pressing against my chest. The air tasted new, untainted, like it belonged to me again. She glanced at me, and for a moment we shared a quiet understanding, an unlikely bond forged out of betrayal. He had thought he could keep us divided, keep us doubting. Instead, we found strength in leaving him behind. We didn't say much as we walked down the street, our footsteps sinking as if they'd known each other forever. I could still feel the weight of Ethan's stunned silence behind us, but with every step forward it grew smaller, like a shadow shrinking in the sun. She finally broke the quiet, her voice low but certain. "Thank you for calling me that night." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to answer. "Thank you for picking up," I whispered back. We weren't friends, not yet, but in that moment, we weren't enemies either. We were survivors. By the end of the week, I filed for divorce. The paperwork sat heavy in my hands at first, but when the pen touched the page, it felt like release. Years of lies, of second-guessing myself, of carrying the weight of his choices. It all ended in one signature. She texted me once after, a simple message, "I'm free to. Thank you." That was enough. We didn't need long conversations or constant reminders. We had both reclaimed our lives, and that was all that mattered. Ethan tried to call, of course, long voicemails full of excuses, promises, and pleas. I stopped listening after the first. His words no longer held power over me. Every time the phone lit up with his name, I felt nothing. Not anger, not longing, just nothing. And that emptiness was a victory all on its own. Because sometimes freedom doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. Weeks later, I found myself back at that same cafe, not with him, but alone this time. The smell of roasted beans was the same, the hum of conversation unchanged, yet everything inside me was different. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and let the sunlight spill across my face. No shadows lingered anymore. My hands didn't shake when I lifted the cup, and for once I didn't feel like I was performing for anyone. This was my life now, mine to rebuild, mine to savor. I thought about Ethan, though only briefly. I pictured him sitting at that table, his lies unraveling in front of him, and the hollow look in his eyes when we walked away. For so long, I had worried about what life without him might look like. But in that moment, watching the world move on outside the glass, I realized the truth. He was the one left behind, not me. He had gambled with two lives and lost them both. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass. My shoulders were straighter, my eyes clearer. For the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking back at me. She wasn't broken, she wasn't betrayed, she was free. And as I pushed the door open, stepping out into the sunlight, one thought carried me forward. He thought he had two women. In the end, we both walked away.